My name is Ruth Whitaker. I'm 41 years old. And this is the story of how the man I loved tried to erase me, quietly, efficiently, like I was a blemish on his spotless life, and how I took back everything he thought he'd stolen. It started on a Wednesday morning. 5:26 a.m. to be exact. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the orange glow above the stove. I stood barefoot, clutching the handle of the coffee pot, when my husband Ethan's phone buzzed softly on the counter. He was still asleep on the living room couch behind me, snoring faintly. He'd come home late again the night before, claiming work had run long. That excuse had worn thin, but I didn't challenge him. I hadn't challenged Ethan in years. But this morning, I glanced at the screen, something I'd never done in our 18 years of marriage. I didn't touch it. Just looked. I'm wearing the red dress today. I doubt you'll be able to take your eyes off me. My heart stopped. My hand froze. The coffee pot trembled ever so slightly. I wasn't the kind of wife who checked phones. Not because I was naive, but because I used to believe kindness didn't need surveillance. I believed in trust. Or at least, I thought I did. Until that message. When Ethan stirred behind me, mumbling a groggy morning, "Sweetheart," I slid the coffee into his favorite mug and placed it in front of him. He stretched, yawned, picked up the phone, and deleted the message without hesitation. His fingers moved fast. Too fast. And I said nothing. Because no one teaches you how to speak when your stomach's hollow and your throat's tight with disbelief. No one teaches you how to stay calm when the man you built your life with, built your trust around, is quietly erasing you like bad code from a system he once upgraded. 3 days later, I was sorting Ethan's blazers for dry cleaning. A folded receipt slipped from the inside pocket. Solstice Restaurant. 2 steaks. 2 wines. 1 panna cotta. Last Friday. The same night I had made his favorite lasagna. The one I ate alone while watching reruns in a cold living room. He walked in behind me as I stared at the receipt, and my body tensed. "Find something interesting?" he asked lightly. I turned. "Just doing laundry." He nodded. "You're always so thoughtful." The words were honeyed. Practiced. Dead. That night, Ethan didn't touch me. Not even a hand on my shoulder. He slept with his back to me, his phone face down under the pillow like a dirty secret. I lay awake for hours. Thinking. Replaying. The next day, I called his office to ask about rescheduling a family dinner. His secretary answered. "Kelsey speaking." Her voice was sugar with an edge. "Hi Kelsey, it's Ruth, Ethan's wife. Is he available?" A pause. Then, "He's in a meeting. I'll let him know you called." "Thanks. It's personal." "I'm sure he's tied up all evening again," she added, like it was her place to know. The way she said his name, Ethan, not Mr. Whitaker, sent a chill up my spine. But it wasn't Kelsey. I knew it now. It wasn't her who wore the red dress. It was someone else. Later that night, I picked up a bottle of wine on the way home, desperate for some connection, some sense of the man I once knew. But when I walked in, the lights were off. His office door was cracked just enough for voices to spill out. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I didn't mean to hear. "She still cooks dinner. Still does my laundry like a machine," Ethan said, his voice smooth. A woman laughed, young, confident. "Told you." They never believe it until the divorce hits. Divorce. I pressed myself against the wall, breath shallow, heart pounding. "I've talked to the lawyer," Ethan continued. "It's all in place. She'll be out of the house with a couple of checks." I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. "I want to be your wife," the woman whispered. "Officially." "You will," Ethan said. "As soon as this is done." "She doesn't have her name on anything." I slid out the back door, the wine still in the bag, my palms soaked in sweat. They weren't just planning to leave me. They were planning to delete me. Legally. Financially. Entirely. It wasn't infidelity anymore. It was premeditated destruction. And that night, I made a choice. Not to scream. Not to cry. Not to confront. But to outmaneuver them. If Ethan wanted a quiet erasure, I would give him something louder than any courtroom gavel. I would take back everything he tried to hide. And I would make sure the entire world watched him fall. And so I began. Not with rage. But with a notebook. May 16th, Jules called Ethan baby. He mentioned a lawyer. He said everything was ready to leave me with nothing. I wrote it down. Every call. Every slip. Every whisper from behind doors he thought were closed. If Ethan wanted war through paperwork, I would fight with something sharper. Memory. By the following Monday, I was no longer just Ethan's wife. I was a quiet observer in my own home, a woman hiding in plain sight. While he kissed my cheek and told me he had client meetings, I was documenting every movement like a seasoned investigator. Ethan left the house every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6:40 a.m., always dressed sharp, cologne lingering behind him like the ghost of the man I once loved. But he never went straight to the office, not at first. From the upstairs window, I watched him make a regular detour to a small, corner cafe downtown. At first, I thought it was innocent. Maybe he just needed coffee. But by the third visit, I noticed he always sat at the same window table, across from a man I vaguely remembered from holiday parties. Daniel Moore. Co-founder of Ethan's firm, Altura Capital. A man who had always seemed different. Quieter. A little reserved, a little out of step with the brash finance bros Ethan surrounded himself with. And Daniel didn't smile when Ethan walked in. I started frequenting that cafe too. Dressed like a yoga teacher, pretending to read invoices for a fake wellness studio. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I sat a few tables away, sipping tea, listening, watching. I didn't have a master plan yet, just instincts and a slow-burning storm inside me. The fifth morning, Daniel came in alone. Gray button-down, tired eyes, and the same black coffee. No sugar. No cream. I walked over. "Mr. Moore?" I asked, my voice calm, steady. He looked up, mildly surprised. "Yes. I'm Ruth. Ethan's wife." There was a flicker of recognition. Then a quiet gesture to the seat across from him. "Please. Sit down." I took a breath. This isn't a casual drop-in. I need to talk to you. Not as Ethan's wife, but as someone who's being cut out of something I never agreed to. Daniel leaned back, guarded but curious. "How much do you know?" "Enough to start pulling threads," I said. Then I told him everything. Not with emotion. Not with tears. But with detail. Precision. The overheard conversation with Jules, the receipts, the plan to strip me of everything, the offshore account I suspected existed but hadn't yet found. When I finished, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled a thick manila envelope from his leather satchel and slid it across the table. "You need to see this." Inside were copies of internal emails that Ethan had sent behind Daniel's back, routing profits through fake shell companies, undermining the firm's shared investments. There were financial reports, too. Charts. Memos. All with one common thread: Ethan was siphoning funds into something called the Horizon Fund. It was real. He wasn't just trying to cut me out. He was cutting out his business partner too. "He's been laying this groundwork for over a year," Daniel said flatly. "Using dummy corporations to move cash. It's all legal on the surface. But dig deep and it's fraud." My mouth was dry. "Why show me this?" Because you're the only person Ethan doesn't see as a threat. That makes you powerful. Daniel looked me square in the eyes. I want to bury him. But I need help doing it right. That moment was the beginning of something terrifying and electric. Daniel taught me how to spot discrepancies in financial records. He walked me through forensic accounting like a seasoned agent, giving me a crash course in corporate crime. I began to look through every drawer, every digital footprint Ethan left behind. I found a hidden USB in the back of his closet, behind an old pair of sneakers. It held folders named Personal and Contracts. Inside were scanned documents with strange signatures, one of them under Julianne Prescott et Jules. I cross-referenced the names. She wasn't just a mistress. She was listed as a business consultant on a document filed through a Delaware-registered LLC. The mistress was in the books. Daniel was right, Ethan's plan was more than betrayal. It was theft wrapped in silk ribbon. And I was done being the ribbon. I copied the files, encrypted them, and began building a trail. One Ethan couldn't erase. But I had to play my part still. I still made dinner. I still laughed at his jokes. I still pretended to be the same Ruth who never questioned the shadows creeping across our marriage. Then one night, I slipped. Intentionally. I left a bank statement, one I'd printed from the hidden files, on the kitchen counter. It listed a deposit into something called Horizon Investment Solutions. When Ethan saw it, his expression cracked, just for a second. "What's this?" he asked, trying to play casual. I shrugged. "I don't know. I thought all our money was in First West. I found it while organizing some tax stuff." He smiled too quickly. "It's nothing. Just a temporary transfer." But the twitch in his jaw told me everything. That night, he stayed up late. Deleted things from his laptop. Shredded papers. I watched from the hallway like a ghost of the life he once promised me. And when he finally crawled into bed, I whispered, "I think we should go to marriage counseling." He didn't answer for a while. Then he exhaled. "I don't have time for that." And just like that, I knew he thought he'd already won. That I was broken. Defeated. But he had no idea I was setting the stage for a collapse. His. The summer passed like a silent countdown. Each week brought me closer to the explosion Ethan didn't even know he'd lit himself. I didn't scream. I didn't throw plates or storm out of the house in a soap opera blaze. Instead, I became invisible. The perfect wife. The last thing he ever suspected. Every Tuesday, Daniel and I met at the same downtown cafe. Our conversations were short, strategic, and to the point. He taught me how to trace suspicious fund flows, how to read shell company filings, how to recognize laundering tactics disguised as real estate investments. I became fluent in a language I never wanted to learn, deception. And Ethan? He kept underestimating me. He never noticed the USB drive hidden inside my old sewing kit. Never saw me snapping photos of his Horizon fund transfers. Never realized the old phone I kept behind the dresser had full recordings of his speakerphone calls with Jules. He left it on too often. I didn't even need to bug the place, he handed me the rope himself. Still, I couldn't afford to make a wrong move. So I stayed close. Played dumb. One evening in July, while Ethan was in the shower, I staged another breadcrumb. I opened my phone and intentionally left a fake conversation open with my imaginary friend Linda, right on the kitchen table. "Linda, do you think Jules is just a mistress? What if she's helping him hide assets?" "Me, I think she's involved. I might hire an investigator." I made sure Ethan saw it when he came out. I even fumbled like I'd been caught trying to hide it. "It's nothing," I said, forcing a sheepish smile. He looked worried. Not furious, worried. Because Ethan wasn't afraid of confrontation. He was afraid of exposure. 2 days later, Daniel told me that Ethan had scheduled a panicked midnight meeting with his attorney to review asset trail vulnerabilities. The rat was already gnawing at his own trap. And Jules, real name Julianne Prescott, was now appearing in internal emails at Altura Capital as a freelance business consultant. Daniel forwarded one with her signature, Julianne Prescott, Private Strategy Advisor. The arrogance of it made me sick. She was now trying to cash in on more than his affection, she wanted equity. But that was the crack we needed. If she inserted herself into Ethan's financial world, she became evidence. Admissible, traceable evidence. A mistress in the bedroom was scandalous. A mistress in the spreadsheets was criminal. So I pushed them closer together. I suggested Ethan should delegate more to reduce stress. Let someone help you at work, I told him over dinner, spooning mashed potatoes onto his plate like nothing had changed. You've always said Jules is smart. Maybe she can help with the partners? He bit. Of course he did. Jules was already playing pretend executive. She wanted the throne. I gave her the crown, right before it caught fire. By early September, Ethan finally filed for divorce. The documents arrived in a sleek manila envelope, hand-delivered by a courier in a gray suit. The proposal inside was sterile, surgical, and dripping with condescension. He offered me 6 weeks to vacate the home, a temporary support payment, and absolutely no claim to the business. According to him, it was fair. Civilized, even. He had no idea I'd already seen the underbelly of every single account. I read the settlement alone, sitting at the dining table he once promised we'd eat Sunday dinners at until we were gray-haired and laughing over grandkids. I smiled at his arrogance. He still thought I was the same Ruth, quiet, domestic, grateful. But I'd been watching. Learning. Preparing. I contacted Harold West the next morning. He was a divorce attorney everyone knew in Portland, slow, outdated, easy to manipulate. I knew Ethan would dig into whoever I hired. And when he saw Harold's name on the docket, he'd sigh in relief. He'd think I had no clue what I was doing. He'd think the case was over before it started. And he'd be dead wrong. Because Harold was just the decoy. My real attorney was Jessica Blanchard. Harvard Law. Tactical. Quiet. With a reputation for dismantling billion-dollar asset networks in corporate litigation. I met her at a small, unmarked office on the east side of town. She wore no jewelry. She didn't shake hands. She simply asked, "Do you want to win, or do you want to destroy him?" "Both," I said. "In that order." Jessica smiled. "Then let's give him the illusion of victory." She drafted a counter-settlement that appeared weak. Thin. Mild. I would waive rights to the house, unless Ethan couldn't prove it was purchased with clean money. I would relinquish claim to business income, unless the funds involved undisclosed third parties or offshore routing. I would accept a reduced settlement, but only if the asset valuation passed independent audit. It was a legal minefield in disguise. Each clause looked benign. But if Ethan stepped on any of them without perfect documentation, he'd trigger a full investigation. The day of the hearing came. I wore a pale blue dress. My hair pinned up in the same style I'd worn on our first anniversary. Ethan's favorite, back when he used to remember what I liked. Harold played his role perfectly. He fumbled papers. Dropped his glasses. Misquoted legal terms. He was a performance Ethan believed. Carla Monroe, Ethan's new hotshot attorney, presented their offer with that smug, polished tone only overpaid lawyers carry. Ms. Whitaker will vacate the property. She waives all business-related assets. In return, she receives temporary financial support and a clean start. I choked up on cue. Just enough to look fragile. "I don't want anything," I whispered. "I just hope he finds peace." The courtroom pitied me. Carla beamed. Ethan looked victorious. like a king returning from battle. He didn't know that the ink he'd just signed would rot his empire from the inside out. Ethan walked out of the courtroom like a man who'd just won a war without firing a shot. He didn't say much, just gave me a nod, a subtle, condescending dip of the head that said, "Thanks for not being difficult." Then he placed a hand on my shoulder, like he still had the right. "Thank you for being decent, Ruth," he said, almost as if I were a loyal employee who had gracefully accepted a demotion. I looked up at him, kept my voice soft. "I never was petty, Ethan. I just learned to read the fine print." He blinked at that. Just for a moment. But then turned and walked away, his gait relaxed, already envisioning the next phase of his life. The penthouse. The public image. The press-ready smile he'd practiced for years. But he had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks passed. I kept quiet. The house grew still. Ethan stopped calling. Good. I didn't want calls. I wanted consequences. And then came Monday morning. Altura Capital's headquarters. 8:30 a.m. Daniel called an emergency board meeting. 6 members. A full quorum. Ethan showed up thinking it was a budget update. Daniel stood at the head of the long conference table, holding a thick blue folder. His voice was firm. Flat. The kind that doesn't leave room for pleasantries. "We need to address a serious breach of trust," he said. Ethan leaned back, arms folded, already impatient. "If this is about the Q3 report, I thought I..." "It's not," Daniel interrupted. "This is about 3 major projects. And where the money went." He handed each board member a copy of the file. Inside, emails, transaction logs, corporate filings. Pages of evidence linking Ethan to undisclosed transfers routed through the Horizon Fund. Each file traced the path of siphoned funds from Altura's key investments, money rerouted into offshore accounts, disguised as consultancy payments to Jules's fake firm. One of the emails had the subject line, "Transfer before court date, erase First West Trail." There it was. In black and white. Ethan went pale. Silent. A board member, a woman named Janine, finally asked, "You realize this could lead to a federal investigation, Ethan?" Daniel didn't wait. "I propose immediate suspension of Ethan Clark from all executive duties," he said. "Pending full audit." The vote took less than 5 minutes. It was unanimous. By noon, Ethan was escorted out of the building, his badge deactivated, his name removed from the internal server. I wasn't there, but Daniel told me later Ethan didn't speak. Didn't fight. He just walked, stunned, holding a box of personal items and the weight of everything he thought he'd hidden. And Jules? She called him 4 times that day. He never answered. On the 5th call, the head of HR picked up. "I'm sorry," the woman said, professionally curt. "Julianne Prescott's services are no longer required. Her consultant contract has been terminated." Then she was locked out of her company email. Blacklisted from the firm. And worse, whispers started circulating across Portland's tightly woven financial network. A woman involved in asset misappropriation. A mistress who played secretary and nearly got the CEO indicted. No firm would touch her now. I waited 1 more week before the final strike. Jessica filed a motion to reopen the divorce settlement, based on Ethan's failure to disclose key financial information during the proceedings. We presented new evidence, the offshore accounts, the Horizon Fund, the forged payroll files that lowered asset valuation, and the email trail from Jules herself. Every lie Ethan had buried beneath that smug, civilized proposal was now exposed like mold in daylight. His lawyer, Carla, panicked. She tried to stall. Tried to argue that the disclosures were accidental. But she hadn't read the clauses closely enough. Each condition I had agreed to came with a trigger. If Ethan couldn't prove lawful acquisition of assets, the agreement became null. And he couldn't prove anything. Not with that kind of evidence. The court ordered an immediate freeze of his assets. Our home. His car. His company shares. His offshore holdings. Everything was locked for investigation. The judge's voice echoed in the chamber like thunder. Due to material non-disclosure and financial deceit, the asset division is hereby reversed. Within a week, I legally reclaimed our home. Jessica arranged for the transfer of $1.2 million in frozen funds to be rerouted back to me, funds Ethan had tried to hide through shell accounts registered in Delaware, Panama, and the Caymans. Ethan lost his title, his wealth, his credibility. But the deepest cut was the one he never saw coming: reputation. No more speaking gigs. No more magazine profiles. No more faux philanthropy luncheons where he played the role of loving husband turned corporate savant. And Jules? 2 firms rejected her in a week. One hiring manager leaked a note that read, "Too close to a scandal. No thanks." Within a month, her entire online presence vanished. LinkedIn deactivated. Instagram wiped. She disappeared from every space she once barged into like she owned it. She had become toxic. Just like the man she tried to build a future with. I didn't gloat. I didn't dance on the wreckage. But I sat in the same living room where Ethan once smiled across candlelit dinners and said, "Ruth, nothing could ever come between us." I held a hot cup of tea and read the final report confirming the transfer of all recovered assets to my name. The silence was peaceful this time. Not empty. Just earned. About a month after the courtroom ruling, just when the air had begun to shift into autumn, he showed up at my door. Ethan. Holding a bouquet of red roses with limp stems and a sheepish expression that had no business returning to this house. "Hi," he said softly, as if we'd just had a small fight and he was here to make it right. "Can we talk?" I stared at him, the man who once promised me forever, who spent months plotting to erase me like a smudge on his resume. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loose. The spark in his eyes, the one that had once walked into every room like it owned the oxygen, was gone. Replaced by exhaustion. Still, I opened the door. Not out of pity. Not out of nostalgia. But because closure deserves a front row seat. We sat in the living room, the same room he had once planned to sell out from under me. I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask if he wanted to sit. He did anyway, placing the roses on the coffee table, looking around like a ghost coming home to see what had changed. "I've been thinking about everything," he said. "About you. About us." He started with the usual lines. I got lost. I didn't know how to stop. Jules meant nothing compared to what we had. I said nothing. I let him speak, because sometimes silence is sharper than any argument. When he finally fell quiet, I reached into the drawer beneath the coffee table and pulled out a folder. I'd kept it ready for this moment. Not out of revenge, but because some truths deserved to be handed back, cold and paper cut sharp. I slid it across to him. "You should take another look at what you signed." He opened it, eyebrows furrowing as he flipped through page after page, bank records, legal filings, evidence of his emails with Jules. One message stood out, the one where she wrote, "She still has no idea what's coming. Once we lock it in, she's out with nothing but dust." His fingers clenched the folder. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, my tone flat. Ethan didn't answer. His jaw worked silently. Like he wanted to say something that wouldn't come. "This is why I'll never believe a word from your mouth again. And why you need to leave. Right now. Or I'll call my attorney about pressing trespassing charges." He stood, slowly. No protest. No fight. Just nodded. And walked out. The roses sat there for hours after he left, wilting and forgotten, just like every lie he ever told. A few weeks later, I got an email from Daniel. He'd just been promoted to head a new Altura Capital branch in Boston and wanted to know if I might consider relocating. "Fresh start," he wrote. "If you're ready for it." I stared at the message for a long time. Daniel had been steady through it all. Focused. Compassionate without ever offering empty words. There were days I imagined what a life with someone like that might look like, someone who didn't manipulate love like a business transaction. But then I thought about the version of me who used to orbit her life around a man. I wasn't ready to orbit anyone again. Not yet. So I called him. "Thank you, Daniel. Truly. But I think right now, I need to learn how to live for myself." He was quiet on the other end. Then said, "Then you're further along than most." And that was the last time we spoke. I didn't need a romantic ending. I needed my own. Months passed. Ethan faded from the news cycle. I heard through mutual connections that he was trying to rebuild, freelancing as a private consultant, pitching services to small firms who hadn't heard his name before. But in Portland? His name had weight. And not the kind that opened doors. As for Jules, she disappeared entirely. No social media. No presence in the business scene. Until, one afternoon in late winter, I saw her. At the supermarket. A faded hoodie. Stringy hair pulled into a careless bun. She looked up from the frozen food aisle and froze when she saw me. Her eyes flicked wide for a moment, as if remembering every smug text, every whisper in the office, every laugh they'd shared at my expense. I gave a small nod. Not out of acknowledgement. Not out of forgiveness. Just finality. And I walked away. Because she wasn't a villain anymore. She was just no one. I spent that spring reclaiming pieces of myself. I planted wildflowers in the backyard, the same space Ethan once said would be perfect for a pool after the divorce. I donated the furniture he loved, repainted the walls, and turned his old office into a reading room. I took pottery classes. Joined a yoga group. Made friends who didn't know me as Ethan's wife, but simply as Ruth. Sometimes we cooked together, swapped books, laughed about things that didn't revolve around men or marriage. It felt honest. Clean. One warm evening in June, I drove alone to Cannon Beach. I brought my old journal, the one filled with scribbled timelines, evidence lists, court dates. I lit a fire in one of the public rings, tore each page out, and dropped them into the flames. Not because I wanted to forget. But because I no longer needed memory to protect me. That night on Cannon Beach, as the fire crackled and swallowed the last remnants of the life I used to protect, I realized something I hadn't been able to admit, not even to myself. I wasn't broken. I was new. Rebuilt from the quietest parts of survival. Not louder. Not colder. But clearer. And when you see clearly, you don't go back to blurred illusions. That clarity followed me home. I started waking up with purpose. Not for anyone else. Just for myself. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt peaceful. Even the silence had changed. Before, it was empty and cold, like something waiting to collapse. Now, it felt full, like breath after holding it too long. One morning, I walked into my former shared bedroom, now mine alone, and opened the drawer that had once held Ethan's cufflinks. Instead of jewelry, I pulled out a stack of documents I'd set aside. Business papers. Property records. Investment maps. All mine now. Jessica called that week with final confirmation from the judge. Every asset reclaimed was now protected under a private living trust in my name. The house. The restored funds. The shares in Altura Capital. And most importantly, my autonomy. "Your name's the only one on the deed now," she said, her voice light. I smiled, alone in my kitchen, tea steeping in hand. It's about time. I hadn't spoken to Ethan since the day he brought those pitiful roses to my doorstep. But word travels fast in Portland. Apparently, after months of failed attempts to rebrand himself in consulting, Ethan tried launching an online finance course, something about sustainable investment for modern leaders. The irony nearly made me choke on my tea. It flopped. 3 enrollees. 1 refund request. The reviews, one of which called it corporate mansplaining with zero credibility, sealed the coffin. He stopped updating the site after that. What surprised me, though, was a letter I received 2 weeks later. A real letter. Not an email. Not a message dropped through some legal channel. A handwritten envelope addressed in Ethan's old handwriting, the kind I hadn't seen since our early dating years. Inside was a 2-page apology. Not just about the affair. Or the money. Or Jules. But about me. I spent years building a version of success that was hollow, he wrote. And you were the only thing in my life that ever had any real value. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say it. I read it twice. Then set it down. Not out of anger. Not even pain. Just closure. I never responded. Because not every wound deserves a reply. Instead, I drove down to Salem to visit my parents. My father, who had been skeptical about Ethan from the beginning, greeted me at the door with one long look and a tight hug. My mother served coffee and asked me gently, "How are you really doing, honey?" I smiled. Better than I ever thought I could. That weekend, I helped them clean out their garage. We laughed over old boxes, sorted family photos, and told stories about high school teachers and ancient summer trips. For the first time in what felt like a decade, I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't wondering what Ethan was hiding. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because there were no more shoes. No more threats. No more secrets in the walls. I had walked through the fire, not as a victim, but as the one who carried the match and made sure the fire burned clean. On the drive back home, I took the scenic route. The trees were just beginning to change, reds and golds dancing in the late afternoon sun. I rolled the window down, let the wind run its fingers through my hair, and turned the radio off. I didn't need music. The quiet was enough. Back at home, I hung a new painting above the fireplace, something abstract, with rich cobalt blues and thick strokes of rust and silver. It didn't match anything Ethan had ever picked. And that's why I loved it. It was mine. Just like the life I'd rebuilt. Summer bled into early fall, and the quiet life I had pieced together became something more than survival, it became real. My days no longer revolved around who Ethan was with or what lie he was building. They revolved around me. I took morning walks by the river. I started hosting dinner nights with my small circle of friends, 3 women I'd met through pottery class who didn't ask about my past unless I offered it. We cooked meals that filled the kitchen with laughter and clinking glasses. We shared books, swapped recipes, and sat on the porch long after the sun dipped below the Oregon horizon. Not once did I feel the need to explain who I used to be. That person, Ethan's wife, was gone. Not buried. Evolved. And I didn't miss her. One morning in early October, while organizing some shelves in what used to be Ethan's study, I found a photograph tucked in the back of a drawer. It was old, taken maybe 10 years earlier, of Ethan and me on our trip to Paris. I looked so young, so full of unguarded hope, my head resting on his shoulder. We looked happy. But I remembered that night. I remembered how he disappeared for an hour, saying he had to take a call. I remembered standing by the Seine, waiting, telling myself not to read into it. I put the photo face down in the drawer, closed it softly, and left it there. Some things didn't need burning. They just needed to be forgotten. Then, one night in late October, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. No name. Just a single line. I saw you at the farmer's market today. You looked happy. I'm glad. It was Ethan. I didn't need confirmation. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not with longing. Or sadness. With gratitude. Not for him, but for the reminder. Because I was happy. And I owed none of that to him. I blocked the number. A week later, I stood at the edge of my backyard garden, watching the last blooms of summer nod gently in the breeze. The same backyard where Ethan once said he wanted to install a lap pool after the divorce. Now, it was filled with marigolds and lavender, surrounded by a wooden fence I painted myself. I ran my fingers over the petals, soft and alive, and whispered a thank you to no one in particular. Maybe to the wind. Maybe to the fire that had torn through my life. Maybe to the part of me that refused to give up, even when I didn't know I was still fighting. I wasn't rich, but I had more than money. I had clarity. I had dignity. I had peace. And I had one last journal. Not the black leather one I had filled with timelines and whispers. A new one. Clean pages. No plans for revenge. Just thoughts. Hopes. Memories I wanted to keep. I wrote the first line slowly. I was almost erased. But I wrote myself back in. Natalie's story is not just about betrayal. It's a story of endurance, awakening, and power reclaimed. She didn't destroy Ethan with fire. She dismantled him with truth. Piece by piece. Word by word. Clause by clause. Until all that remained was her. If you were moved by Ruth's journey, tell us in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Would you have walked away quietly, or fought until the end? And if you're facing something similar, remember. Some truths, once exposed, can shatter us. But they also give us the chance to begin again, on our own terms. Subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more stories where justice isn't just imagined, it's earned.